Good evening. My name is Stefano Moncada. I'm a lecturer at the University of Malta. Together with Maria and other colleagues also present here, we form part of the climate change platform at the University of Malta. Professor Maria Attard will introduce you about the activities and the scope of the platform, so I'll leave this task to her. I'm very glad today to introduce Professor Taruna Ramessour, who's our special guest coming from the University of Mauritius. Her background is in poverty, trade, and also on gender issues. She's been delivering in the last week a series of lectures and seminars in her research areas, which fit very well also in the some of the research areas that we're developing here at university and we've been working on, like with an eye also on small islands and small states. Today's seminar is about the interlinkages between trade and climate change. I will leave, of course, the context to Taruna to develop later on. I would like to remind you that this session today, this seminar is recorded, so it's being recorded, so our idea will be to make it accessible to everybody here and also to a wider audience after the event, so that we can go through some of the discussion that we've been having here and to disseminate the information. I'm also very glad to have a panel discussion following this presentation with some colleagues and distinguished guests who have joined us in discussing some of the issues in relation to cutting greenhouse gas emissions, especially looking at energy and agriculture as type of case studies with an eye on Malta, but also going out the Mediterranean. So that's it from me. Thank you once again for coming, and I'll leave the floor to Professor Maria Attard.
Thank you, Stefano. I just want to take a few minutes really just to give you an idea of the work that is carried out in terms of the platform. The climate change platform was originally set up to bring together a group of people that in actual fact work in the field of climate change. We do, and we did understand even in the setting up originally of the concept that climate change is one of those topics which is multidisciplinary, investigated through all sorts of fields, whether it is law, whether it is energy, whether it is agriculture, climate science, and so on. And of course the need, following subsequent requests, in actual fact also by government, in terms of what climate change research is carried out at the university. So the platform acts, one, as a means of gathering, providing an arena for climate change researchers to come together. But it also provides opportunities for researchers to look at some of the work that is being carried out in the field of climate change, get in touch with the various people that are doing climate change research. So it's a facilitating infrastructure within the university that hopefully in its evolution and development over time will not only bring climate change to the forefront, also because, as we know, the discourse in climate change is in particularly top of the agenda at the moment, so we really need to push a bit more in terms of raising awareness about climate change and raising a more understanding about the implications and the way that the climate change factors influence and will influence our life. So I welcome you to the seminar. Thank you for coming, and I hope we'll have time to discuss further issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Maria Attard. Now I would like to leave the floor to Professor Taruna Ramessour, who's going to deliver the presentation, and then we'll have a small roundtable as anticipated, and of course a Q&A session also with your observations and any other type of intervention you'd like to make. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, everybody. I hope you're hearing me.
No, not very well. Is it okay now? Yeah? Fine, okay. So thank you, Climate Change Platform, for organizing this seminar. So today the topic that I'm going to address is on assessing and seizing sustainable trade opportunities in specific green economic sectors. And the two sectors that I will look at is agriculture and energy sector. Okay. Okay, so we start with the agricultural sector. So what we've seen is that trade in agricultural products has continued to expand, mostly as a result of demand from emerging economies. So as you can see in the diagram, this is the latest figures we had. So over the years, the value of agricultural exports by stage of processing has been increasing, okay? Be it for least developed countries, for landlocked developing countries, or even for small island developing states. If we say in terms of region, so the evolution of net trade in agricultural products by region, that also has been increasing for almost all regions except for Asia. What we see is that at the same time, the agricultural sector has an important environmental footprint linked to resource depletion in terms of loss of biodiversity, excessive water consumption. So you can see when you have increase in production of meat or cereal, but at the same time you have an increase in the use of nitrogen and other forms of fertilizers. So the environmental footprint has been increasing. Even in terms of increased use of water, so resources, increasing use of pesticide production has been on the increase. So given this evolution, now there has been focus on green agriculture. Why we say green agriculture? Because we expect that green agriculture will also not only reduce environmental footprint, but will also reduce poverty, because it will be beneficial, especially for small farms. This is a brief from UNEP 2013 from page 53, what they say about green agriculture and how it will reduce poverty. Now, there is some confusion regarding what is green and what is sustainable agriculture, but as such, there is no concise definition of what is green and what is sustainable. So how do we define that? It's just that it refers to farming practices and techniques that simultaneously, it's not separately, it's simultaneously maintain and increase farm productivity, but at the same time ensuring the provision of food and ecosystem services on a sustainable basis, reduce negative externalities, and also rebuild ecological resources. So this is what we meant by green or sustainable agriculture, whichever name you want to give it. So what are the trade opportunities in this sector which we want to promote? The very first opportunity that arises is in terms of certified products. What we have seen is that one of the examples that we have is the fair trade. And we have seen that there was a survey that was carried out, okay, by GlobeScan, and they have found that people have more trust when you have fair trade. They trust the product more. So they trust products which are certified. So when they trust products which are certified, so there will be higher demand for such products. So if you can see global sales of fair trade cane sugar, it has been on the increase over the years. Another opportunity in the green agricultural sector in terms of trade is obviously organic agriculture. So if we can see the value of global organic agriculture market over the years, again, it has been increasing. So there is definitely an opportunity in that area also.
it's not just the final product, but also related products and services, like you have natural pesticides, fertilizers, for which there's an increase in demand, and also for equipment. But not only equipment, but also for technical and managerial services for certification, because you need people to certify these products. So there is an opportunity for increase in employment in these fields also. And we are also seeing some increase in ecotourism services relating to sustainable agricultural farms or facilities. So all these areas show that there's plenty of opportunities in green agriculture sector in terms of trade. Now we will see the case study of a specific country, so that's South Africa, how this can work. So South Africa, why we have chosen South Africa as a case study to show how there is opportunity, and there are obstacles also, but how we can deal with these obstacles. South Africa has a diverse agricultural sector, okay? So it is comprised of field crops, horticulture, animal production, dairy farming, fish farming, different types of farming. But the main export is the food segment. Like we export most of our fruits because we don't produce fruits. So most of our fruits, that is most of the fruits in Mauritius come from South Africa, like apples, mangoes, or oranges. They come from South Africa. So the opportunity was a shift towards more sustainable organic production that could make agricultural exports a major driver for a transition to a green economy in South Africa, because they were moving towards a green economy because they wanted to move towards sustainable development goals. So what were the opportunities in South Africa is that they have suitable certified exports of organic products for all these products listed there. So this is the opportunity that is already available. And the enabling conditions, in terms of constraints, there are certain constraints and challenges that need to be addressed in South Africa. They are in terms of water scarcity, high environmental footprint from unsustainable agricultural practices. They have social development challenges. You know, there's a lot of high unemployment, poverty, inequality. There is also the characteristics of foreign demand in terms of stringent regulatory aspects. They face a lot of, not trade barriers, but not in terms of tariff barriers, but non-tariff barriers, NTBs. They face a lot of these, which restrict their trade. So what measures can improve or can promote domestic organic agriculture industry in South Africa, given the context and given the different challenges that you have? So the very first thing is that the establishment of a national organic regulation, which they don't have. There is need for data gathering on organic market. So to show people that, yes, there is an opportunity there, you need to collect data and show what is the trend. There's need for schemes to facilitate conversion from non-organic to organic farming. There's a need to establish an organic agricultural development zone to give financial incentives and support, trade facilitation, to promote organic export in regional economic integration arrangements. Now, South Africa is a member of many regional blocs, but in these regional blocs, there is no promotion, there is no clause or no agreement regarding promotion of organic exports. At the same time, there's also need for international agreements with major markets, because their major market is the EU. So they need international agreements with their major market in terms of how to promote organic agricultural industry. So this was the case with agriculture, where, because I just have like 15 to 20 minutes, so I'll go quite quickly on that. Now with trade and renewable energy, so the next sector. So let's see from a broad perspective what is the opportunity. So we see that there has been significant opportunities for both renewable energy and energy efficiency equipment. From a business perspective, what we see is that there's opportunity for producers of necessary supply technology, equipment like solar panels. There's also opportunity for producers who are engaged in raw materials required to produce these technology. And there's also, in terms of electricity for export, which we will see as a case study, There's also opportunity in terms of foreign investors in renewable energy production and services related to renewable energy. So you can see in this sector also there's quite a wide range of opportunity that exist. So if we can see renewable energy and energy efficiency equipment, so you can see world imports of renewable energy equipment has been on the increase, and even world merchandise imports has been increasing. So there's a demand for it. Now, if you see some of the major world leaders in terms of production and export of the different types of technology, renewable technology that you have. So you can have, in terms of ethanol, you have Brazil, because they produce sugarcane. You have solar water heaters, Mexico. Coal classification, you have China. So you have different countries who are world leaders in different technologies. But most of them, you can see, they are not from developed economies. They are developing economies. Like you have Brazil, India, China, you have Indonesia, you have Mexico. So there's opportunity for these developing countries to expand in this sector. Now, in terms of exports, so the first thing that the second thing that we can have is electricity export that we have seen initially. So the upscaling of electricity production from renewable resources is not only useful from an energy security, but also from environmental perspective. In terms of biofuels, now, here there is quite a controversy in terms of biofuel, because you have first generation biofuels, which uses, food crops like maize, and there's a lot of controversy over this because it uses food which could be used, so it goes against food security. And it also uses a lot of arable land. But there's also the second generation biofuel, which we should exploit, which encompass different forms of biomass, like woody crop, different forms of organic waste, and which does not use food and do not create an additional demand for land. So as in the case of agriculture, you just don't have the product, but related product and services. So energy efficiency, which involves energy performance assessment and technical support, reduction in energy and carbon intensity of production processes. Now, in the energy sector, the case study that we'll see quite briefly is that of Ghana. So Ghana is found in Africa, as you can see there. So Ghana and its neighbors have had cross-border electricity supply arrangement for decades. Ghana has for many years been trading electricity with its neighbors, like you have so many countries it has been trading electricity with. And it has special arrangements for that. And you can see over the years how the evolution of gross electricity exports from Ghana to neighboring countries has more or less been rising, except for between 2007, where there was a drop, and then it has been on the increase again. Now, what they want to do is that they want to go ahead with a regional energy integration vested in the West African power pool. So what are the opportunities that already exist? Is that they're already exporting renewable energy, sourced electricity to countries or neighboring countries. They are also exporting solar energy equipment. In terms of enabling conditions, they had certain constraints which they have been able to address, like suppose they have now a strong and credible legal framework, which is very important. They have an open power sector with separate and different players in generation. But the constraints that need to be addressed is a power grid at nearly its full capacity. So they have a power grid which is nearly at its full capacity, so limited base load. They have lack of national generation capacity, and sometimes there's blackout. They have relatively high cost of renewable sourced power supplies, and they have lack of national support funds. And there's a need for significant international and domestic funds. So what are the proposed measures in this case to promote the renewable energy sector in Ghana is promotion of domestic generation and transmission. How can we do that? So through the identification of most appropriate sites for solar PV plants, land acquisition process, which can be quite demanding in Ghana, adequate incentive to increase solar power generation, adequate supplies of base load and dispatchable capacity. In terms of cooperation through international collaborative frameworks, which we call WAP. So here there's a need to extend and upgrade the cross-border transmission lines for development of a more integrated regional power market. There's a need to reap efficiency gains from scale production and integration. And there's a need to seek both international financial assistance and to leverage private finance, because you need to involve the private sector in order to have finance and also in order to engage in what we call PPP, public-private partnership, okay, so that the process can be more successful. In terms of general enabling conditions, so irrespective of the country, now we have just have some general enabling conditions for whichever country it is, not specific. So the general enabling conditions is the first thing, you need appropriate regulatory framework, which is very important. In that context, so you need to set policy objectives. Your objectives should be precise. You should know what you want. You define the bounds of what is permissible, so you should have certain benchmark, or certain yardstick, or certain cutoff marks for what is permissible in terms of environmental footprint. You should organize the condition for the conduct of certain activities. In terms of shifting public investment, so there should be public spending in targeted infrastructure, green public procurement, which I know the European Commission came with one green public procurement guidelines, which can be implemented in tender for the public sector. It was in 2008. They have it on the website also. I think it's for around 18 products that they have it. You should also have specific financial benefits that should be given. Now, in terms of integration into international cooperative frameworks, so the first thing is that there's a need for market access and leveling of the playing field. There's a need for adequate support, financial, technological, as well as capacity building, because sometimes they do have the financial and technological capacity, but if they don't have the human capacity, then it won't work. So with that, I will end. I think I am within the time limit, so leave the floor to Stefano.
So I would like to ask you if there is any burning question or reaction to the presentation before we proceed to, to our panel discussion. So is there anything you would like to ask or clarification about the presentation or the arguments you've just heard? Yep, Professor Maria Tard. Now, let me come to you, don't worry, I'll come to you. Okay.
So is there a particular explanation for the graph, the energy dip in 2007, 2006, when...
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, do you have an explanation why the graph is so variable? Yeah. And of course, the particular dip, yeah.
I think it was this one. Let me just go to it. Wait.
No, it's towards the end.
Yeah, I know, it's the electricity export of Ghana.
Yeah.
I'll just go to it. Sorry for that. Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, it was because the domestic production was low in that year. So it was not that they didn't want to export, it was because their own production was low in that particular period. That's why they couldn't export. So the dip was from the supply. That's why they couldn't export.
Thank you for your presentation. If I may continue on this one, what is the main source of renewable energy in Ghana?
Sorry?
What type of renewable energy source is used to generate electricity for export in
It
Ghana?
is solar energy.
Solar,
Yeah, it's
okay.
solar energy.
Very good. I find interesting in your presentation is that many times we here in, let's call it Europe, we underestimate the work and the best practice examples that Africa can offer us. Here you have showed us two very interesting examples where one of them is about sustainable agriculture in a way. And this agriculture is having a very good market, and it is flourishing. And the second one, it's about grid connection, which even in Europe, we are still struggling to make it work perfectly. While here we are seeing more than one country already connected in one network. What do you think are the success secrets behind those two examples? How did they manage to do that? Because for us in Europe, we say Africa is still third world. They don't have the facilities. They don't have support. They don't have enough know-how. What do you think makes such an example successful?
Okay, thank you for the question. For South Africa and for Ghana, I think the enabling conditions differ. In the case of Ghana, it was very strong institutions. Okay, so it was like the regulatory framework was very strong. Like we have different enabling conditions. Whereas in South Africa, it was more in terms of funding. They had the fund to do it, and there was capacity building in terms of training people, engaging in it. So it was easier to make the transition from traditional agriculture into organic agriculture. So that's the difference between the two. But the enabling conditions were there. But still, there are certain obstacles that need to be catered for. Like I mentioned, there are certain obstacles. They have not, reached perfect, like 100%, but they are on the way. Okay? Yeah, and you rightly mentioned that sometimes we try to underestimate what Africa is doing, but some of them are doing very well in the field of green, sector, basically. I think we also, like island economies, like Mauritius, we need to learn from them. Like sometimes we think, but the thing is that Ghana, why it could export? Because it is landlocked, so it has, neighboring countries, which is easier to have a solar panel, network grid compared to an isolated island like us. But that doesn't mean we cannot do in other green sectors. So there are other opportunities that we should seize and try to exploit that.
I had a question in terms of the certification. You mentioned the importance of fair trade in that specific example, or the organic part. Now, what we have noticed in Europe is, of course, also a similar trust in terms of the research that has been conducted for some specific products which carry either the fair trade or the organic, but there's been some question in terms of the monitoring of the certification process. So what I'm wondering is, where there is a high regulatory process, like in Europe, where everything is more or less very well monitored, we cannot expect or see the same in other settings, where it might be a bit more difficult to certify that that product is really either fair trade or organic. Do you have any evidence in terms of this certification? Do people, particularly in the area that you have analyzed and in Africa specifically, pay a lot of attention to the monitoring of whether the certification is truthful?
Okay, this is a very good question. Well, the thing is that, like, if they abide by fair trade, then there is, full monitoring because it's something international. But if it is like a domestic, certification, then it is quite doubtful, particularly in some African countries. I won't say all African countries. But the more, severe, the more stringent you are on your standards, the more difficult it is to promote that. So initially there should be, I think, from my perspective, a leeway just to make people, adjust to that. Like I give you an example, in Mauritius we are promoting social entrepreneurship, okay? So social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, we are trying to encourage that. The very first obstacle that they tell you is that they cannot abide by the very, strict, certification that we place on them, like they cannot meet the ISO, whatever that they have to abide by. So what the government has done is that, okay, if you cannot meet all of them, at least you meet 2 or 3, then by the time, you are used to it, so it is like, step-by-step process. So to help you transit into that. Because if you enforce it, very severely at the very initial phase, many people may just, be demotivated. They may not engage into green sectors.
Thank you very much. Any other observation, question, curiosity? All right, so thank you very much once again. Now I'll ask our panel, well, while I asked the members of the panel to come here, I'll also construct the panel manually and physically, so I'll take the chairs and ask Charles, please, to join here, Martin, and Tony, and please, Taruna, feel free to join us. Yes, please. So you can see all is ongoing. Maria, would you like to join as well? It's up to you. Okay, very good, no problem. Yes, let's take another chair, all right? Okay, thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, it's for you, the glass of water. Oh, thanks.
Actually, there is no need. Okay, no, there isn't need. No. You're gonna sit, I'm gonna stand up. Okay, that's very good. Please, have a seat.
It is a hot seat.
So I'm going to introduce very quickly, and please feel free to integrate if I miss any part of who you are or what you're doing currently. Okay, you know Professor Taruna. Charles Youssef is a lecturer and a member of the Institute for Renewable Energy, Sustainable Energy, excuse me. Oh, thank you. At the University of Malta. So thank you for accepting and for being here. Martin, who's the president or director or both of director of Friends of the Earth Malta, one of the biggest networks of environmental NGOs representing Malta, and Tony Melli is also a visiting lecturer at the University of Malta, if I'm correct, based at the Institute for Earth Science, correct? Okay, Earth Systems. So thank you very much for accepting. Now, the idea would be to build on the presentation which we just had and ask some questions in the context of Malta, but in general in the context of islands, because also to grab the opportunity to have Professor Ramessour here with us, who also comes from Mauritius, another island state. So I'm going to, feel free to first have a first round on comments on the question. So I'd like to ask Tony if you think that in recent years, particularly after joining the European Union, the efforts done in the agricultural sector have been, I wouldn't say enough, but I would say that they have been a concerted effort from all the sub-sectors forming the agriculture sector to go towards a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So what is the state of play in this regard? Lisa, let's go to all this.
The issue is simple yet complicated at the same time. The EU uses an approach where the basic principle is one size fits all. There are a series of golden rules, most of them quite rightly environmentally oriented. They are also animal welfare oriented and also consumer oriented. But on the whole, it's funding agriculture to become greener. So in the long term, the ideals are right. But when you start putting into practice certain issues in certain countries crop up. At the moment, here in Malta, to be able to observe so many regulations, one of the measures that is the more popular one is the less favored areas, whereby because of our environmental constraints, people get something like 20 euros a tonne or 150 euros per hectare, more or less, to be able to support them, to act as a baseline on which other agri-environmental measures are taken up. But well, good at one point. On the other hand, the amount of bureaucracy, the amount of conformity that farmers have to get tied into to observe these measures is pushing them slightly away, in the sense that instead of being simple producers, happy in doing their job, etc., now they're turning bureaucrats. If they don't conform to certain written obligations, they could be liable to get fined or lose their funding. But on the other hand, the reality is that the majority of small-time farmers get between 10 to 15% of their income from these funds, and without these funds, they would not survive. So it's a bit of an issue there. But on the whole, things are improving from an environmental point of view. What is becoming a bit more difficult is when we look at organic stuff, for example. It is good. There is definitely an increase for organic stuff and food which is non-GMO. But at the same time, there is another issue now. More serious conservationists, even consumers, are getting worried about the footprint. It's good to eat healthy food, but if the importation of that food costs so much in fuel uptake, in energy uptake, etc., if it raises all that much more of a environmental imbalance, some people are questioning the availability, the right availability of that product. And there seems to be an awakening trend, even in the United States as well, for what is called community-supported agriculture, whereby local farmers cater for the surrounding neighborhood, and they are producing exactly what is required without any surplus, without competition with any other farmers from the general market, because they are all cooperating, the farmers of that locality, and they are seeing to the needs of the community. And it seems that with that particular shift, we are going to hopefully in the future better address both the environmental needs and the requirements of consumers.
Thank you very much. You've touched on so many good points, and I'd like to also build on this and ask Martin a very specific question. You have, as Friends of the Earth, in the course of this, particularly in the last 10 years, have tried to look into also best practice or worst practice. And I remember a very interesting experiment which you have conducted. You tested the blood of some people, and of course, it wasn't a big sample, but it was interesting. And you've noticed that the quantity of pesticides and other residues due to a certain type of very intensive agriculture have at some alarming rates for the Maltese, particularly when compared to other members of the other countries. Which leads me also to another consideration, which is the recent debate we had about the amount of pesticides in the food produced in Malta. So linking also to what Tony was saying, that is the trend is to try to fund a greener agriculture. What are the real incentives that could be put into place, in your opinion, to change this trend? And are we close to it?
Now I'm going to introduce another term. I mean, so far we've heard green agriculture, community agriculture, and I'm going to add another one, which is agroecology, actually, which I think incorporates both the environmental but also the social aspect of including communities as being part of their small scale kind of what you mentioned actually as farmers and the people buying produce from somewhere close by actually. So yeah, I mean that's one thing that we kind of discuss as Friends of the Earth. I think that's the way forward, basically small scale agriculture, which reduces the amount of pesticides. I mean, yes, organic agriculture, but as we've heard before, I mean, there are some issues with that as well, especially when it comes to small farmers trying to keep up with all the bureaucratic processes, the fees involved as well. And we're not against organic agriculture, just to be clear. But the idea is that maybe it needs to be done in a way which small farmers can really be part of it as well, actually. Because we realize that farmers spend a lot of time out there in the field, and they don't have the time to also be able to do all these bureaucratic processes. They might need to hire someone to do that, increase their costs, and as we can see already in Malta, their costs are already quite high, and their livelihoods are always on the line, basically. We've recently actually, and I can mention this as well. Sorry. Yes, that's because of this. We've launched the Agrocatina actually campaign, which involved quite an extensive study on the agriculture situation in Malta. But we also created this guide actually for customers, which deals with local and seasonal produce. So people can, I have a few copies of this with me as well actually here. When they go shopping, they can actually consult this guide and check whether the produce they're buying is in season and whether it's local. And why are we doing that? It's mainly because if it's local, it means that it's coming from somewhere close by, thus reducing all the transportation issues that come with buying produce from, I don't know, South America or other countries, but also seasonal. I mean, seasonal can be, I mean, is normally the best thing to have, even when it comes to energy consumption or pesticide use. I mean, there are so many reasons why we are asking for that, actually. Yes, I mean, on the issue of pesticides itself, I mean, the issue that Stefano raised, and the test we had done actually was on glyphosate, which is a herbicide which is widely used all over the world, basically. I think it's one of the most used herbicides in the world. Right now, the EU is discussing, and they will take a decision on Monday, where to extend its use for the next 5 years. It seems like that they will go for another extension, maybe for a shorter period, but probably it will eventually be phased out. I mean, that's what we're hoping, at least. But the shocking thing was that in Malta, I mean, just to be clear, we did only 10 tests here in Malta, but the reason, I mean, the number was not important. Even if one person was found to have glyphosate in their urine, actually, it would have been enough, because the industry was saying, no, glyphosate never ends up in the human body, and never kind of, you will never find it in a human body, basically. So in Malta, 9 out of 10 people had high levels actually of glyphosate in their body, which was the highest in the tests taken all around Europe, basically. So that was quite alarming. I mean, okay, in the media there was quite a bit of an alarming reports, I mean, on pesticide use. And I'm sure that many farmers here in Malta are quite aware of that as well, and they do try to avoid. But that's why we encourage actually people to buy stuff directly from their farmers. They can see the face of the farmer who had produced their food, and go to the farmer's market, for example, and you build a relationship actually with these people. You know where your food is coming from, and I think that's very important, because after all, you are what you eat, and it's quite important that you really know where your food is coming from. And that gets you in discussions actually with farmers, and if people tell them, listen, does this have pesticides in it, maybe they'll think about not producing stuff with pesticides as well. And I've heard many stories similar to this, where kind of farmers start producing stuff which the clients basically would be demanding at the end of the day.
Thank you, Martin. Charles, I think that the energy sector is probably the highest source of CO2 emissions in the country, and together with transport and agriculture, they have a big part in this. However, while these two other sectors, agriculture and transport, have seen, as far as I remember, an increase in the CO2, at least in the energy sector, there's been an increase in the uptake of renewable energies. So in the last 10 years, we've seen from percentages like 0 point something to almost touching the two figures, if not exceeded, and you might have new data coming out to confirm that. So my question to you is, what are the best practice or good elements which you can take from this relatively good improvement, which could perhaps even drive other sector or be interlinked? I'm thinking of biogas or many animal farming taking up on solar and etc. Do you have anything to?
Thank you. With regards to agriculture and energy, I see a missing link, not only in Malta, but in many of our policy making, European policy making regulations. Because while we are talking about sustainable agriculture, and we come up with different labels, we hardly discuss what type of energy is being used in these agricultural lands. For example, many of our agricultural products come from greenhouses. And greenhouses require heating, especially in Northern Europe or in places where the weather is cold. In Malta, the greenhouses even require cooling, because opening the windows of the greenhouse sometimes is not sufficient to make the product produce as much as the producer would like. So when we come to sustainable agriculture, I think we are focusing too much, not that I don't agree with it, but we are focusing too much on pesticides, on sustainability of the use of land, but not on the energy used in the agriculture sector itself. And here we are not talking about the farmer who has tomna, we say, like a small piece of land, and he wants to grow some potatoes or some tomatoes or some lettuce. We are talking about large producers who produce corn, who produce oil seeds, and so on. These are the ones that really affect climate change, because from there you can see the pollution coming, the carbon emissions coming. To come to your answer, to your question, the use of renewable energy in agriculture is still very low, not only in Malta, but also in Europe. And one of the very recent studies that we have made on greenhouses in Malta, we came up, we made like a statistics of how many greenhouses there are in Malta and how many of these can house, for example, photovoltaic panels to produce electricity, both for using in-house in the greenhouse itself and also for exporting to the grid. And we have found this to be a very good potential sector whereby government, or at least the public sector, can make use of this roof area, because practically greenhouses are made of temporary buildings that have roofs, to supplement the fact that photovoltaic panels are degrading in efficiency year after year. And this is an intrinsic property of solar panels, that every year they lose roughly 0.75 to 1%, which means that in 20 years your solar panel will lose a 20% production. How does this affect us? It affects us because if we are to reach a certain target, for example, at the moment, we need to reach 10% renewable energy by 2020. Now, if we are going to depend so much on photovoltaics, which is exactly what we are doing today, the fact that photovoltaics have started being introduced in Malta in large quantity in 2006, by 2020, those first stage panels are already degraded by at least 4%, if not 6%. And in order to keep to the target, you need to supplement, you need to install more photovoltaics. But where will you install them? You cannot install them in the original PV panel systems, because these were designed and they cannot take up more panels. So you need to create new PV farms, let's put it that way, to counterbalance this deficiency. And greenhouses are one of the best potential places that something like that can be put. In doing so, you will also make agriculture more sustainable from the energy perspective. I know of at least 2 MEPA planning authority permits where the greenhouses are going to install photovoltaic panels. So there is already a move and awareness in among farmers to make use of land, or at least for the same piece of land to have double use. And although some people might feel that this can create shading in the greenhouse and make some plants grow less efficiently, this is of course not the case in Malta, because number one, you can design the photovoltaic panels in such a way that the shadow in a particular piece of land is not constant throughout the day. And secondly, the problem of our farmers here is that there is too much sun for our plants. So putting them in the shade makes it an added value. The second thing that I would like to just give as a question, I'm not going to answer it, are we really proud of sustainable agriculture? Or we are just doing it for the sake of finding or putting up a new product on the market? You have rightly mentioned the fair trade label. This is only one of the labels. Fair trade, correct me if I'm wrong, it's more on the social aspect, supporting communities and paying them the right amount of salary, let's put it this way. I just tell you this. When I go to the supermarkets, I look on the products. And some products already use renewable energy in their factories, especially cereals, for example. You know how small are the words we are using renewable energy? It's minute, very small. Our factory uses photovoltaic panels to produce energy, to produce the cereal. So I think we need to be really proud of what we are doing here. And this message could be also somehow relate to large producers.
I think you made a very good point in this, and perhaps, we'll learn, at least, coming from economics, we give a lot of importance to incentives, right? So sometimes incentives and economic instruments in general, like taxes or any type of subsidies or schemes, can work to promote or fix what we think is wrong. So my question to you, Taruna, is there any incentive that, in your opinion, has worked in these 2 sectors from a government intervention point of view that have helped perhaps Mauritius or other countries that you have studied in the African area or in any other case study, where perhaps energy and agriculture really were helped by this type of incentives, and what type of incentives these were to be effective? I know that there is a lot of history in Mauritius about the cane sugar industry and how it was downsized, but also changed some of its nature. Maybe perhaps you want to say something about that as well.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Okay, so in terms of incentives that has worked in Mauritius, there were many incentives, like giving microcredit, but these have not really worked. But the one which has really worked in Mauritius was that we have given corporate tax deduction whenever you are investing in an innovative process which has to be green. But in the sense that they do check when they give you the tax reduction. If you're producing something which is green, but your process is not green, then you don't get the deduction. So it has to be from concept till it reached the customers, it has to be green. Then you receive that deduction. Then it ensures that, yes, you are following something which is sustainable. Because it doesn't serve the purpose. You are producing something which is green, okay? The product is green, but the way you have produced it is not green. Or even your marketing is not green. Then you don't get that deduction. So this corporate tax deduction for investment in terms of green, not only products, but from start of the conception till it reached the customers, this has improved many processes in terms of greening them, transition towards greening. And it has also helped many small firms to transit from small to medium firms, okay? Because most of the small firms, they were facing problems in terms of finance. And also they were not getting that much of guidance. So this corporate tax deduction was also complemented by capacity building. So the firms were also receiving some training of how to green their process, green their marketing. So it's at every stage of the production process till it reaches the consumers. Now the only thing was that some firms, they have tried, you know, like there will be always some firms who will try to cheat here and there. So there were some firms who have tried to show that, yes, they were embarking on this transition, but finally it was not so. So there was a monitoring. So it's not something that you get the corporate tax deduction. Once you get it, you will always get it. No, there's always a monitoring. So after 5 years or after 3 years or after even 2 years, in some cases it was after 1 year, they come and do the monitoring at the firm and see, yes, are you following the process that you have mentioned in your proposal? Is it so? So if it is so, if they are satisfied with it, then they were given the deduction in terms of corporate tax deduction, and it has worked.
Do you know how much was the reduction?
The reduction, so from, that is at each stage there was different types of reduction. So if it was like in terms of process, the technology that you use, so it was 5%. So if it is, you are producing something which is green, so the final product, that was 2%. So at each stage you get different percentages, but it should be at each and every stage. If it's just at one stage that you're applying something which is sustainable or green, you don't get the deduction.
So before opening up the floor for questions, I have I would like a very quick answer from you. So if I know reducing greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in these two sectors, energy and agriculture, is a very complex process. However, if you were to have a magic wand and wanted and implementing one measure, what would this be? Can be even intersectorial, but what do you think could be you know, a very good tool or idea, perhaps, or even conceptually, to move towards a reduction of greenhouse gases in these two sectors? Please, Tony.
We have to look at things a little bit more holistically, because sometimes you're just looking at energy, but there are other associated things. We seem to forget one item in particular, our health. And associated with manure and the environment is the nitrates issue. All Malta has been declared a nitrate vulnerable zone. And if we could find a way of converting our manure to biomass energy, we'll be hitting 20 birds with one stone. If we, just as a passing remark, if you look at Valencia and nitrates, and just key in those two words, you'll find the issues they're having with the nitrates, and they have a lower level of nitrates in their water than we have. They've got cancers, they've got heart issues, etc., etc. Over here, we're in dreamland on this issue, etc. It hasn't been tackled or addressed by anyone. But by addressing energy, sustainability, etc., through a possible biomass approach, I think It would be one step in the right direction.
Biogas.
But I mean, possibly something that would be one of the things at least, is a small scale kind of way of doing things. I mean, both in agriculture but also in energy as well. And Friends of the Earth, for example, in many countries, especially in Europe, they focus a lot on community power. So it's actually a small scale plants. I mean, it could be a wind turbine for the community, solar panels just for that community. But it's not just about the infrastructure itself, but also because people, once they get involved in it, it means that they're taking an interest. So they would maybe even reduce their power consumption, and they would understand where their energy is coming from. Once the power station is somewhere far away, even if it's a solar panel structure somewhere far away, it's like you waste whatever done because you're disconnected from it. But once you're part of it actually, and you're actually producing that thing itself, I think that makes some kind of shift in your brain on how much to waste or what not to waste, and how energy is, and same with agriculture, I think, as well.
So, biogas and community involvement.
Maria will like this. I would give one electric car to each farmer as long as he has photovoltaic panels on his greenhouse. And we will see in 5 years how many electric cars there are in Malta.
Okay, we'll try to connect all of this together, okay? It's a bit of a task for all of you, but very interesting point, thank you. Please.
Okay, yes. For me, it will be like if you're producing green agriculture and renewable energy, if there's no demand for it, it won't motivate people. So I think the government should act like a model. So there should be green public sector procurement. It should be mandatory in government clauses that, you know, you should buy at least 40% of government expenditure should be green products.
Okay, so clean public procurement, very important point. We know how this is important also in Malta and many European countries. Okay, thank you very much for your quick round of answers. I'm going to open up the floor. I only ask you to, if possible, to introduce yourself, just name, surname, and if you want to say where you're affiliated, what you're doing, and that would be enough. Please.
You said that you're not going to use green farming, but some other term. Which term did you use? Pardon? What is it?
So small scale farming, which reduces the amount of pesticide use. I mean, it's basically most of the principle used in organic and permaculture techniques, anyway.
Then the word that you use together.
Agroecology. Okay. Okay. That's okay.
Thank you.
Yes, with regards to the manure, because we tend to focus the agriculture on the plants, but of course we also have a growing cattle, I was going to say problem, but it's industry, which produces quite a lot of output in terms of waste. And apart from the fact that we have very little research on the input-output, and we have very little data on the input-output of how much we feed this cattle, and of course how much waste that produces, and of course CO2, methane, and so on, which also has implications for climate change, because that is something which we actually report in our inventory for the IPPC. And then we have proposals of the solutions. And there has been many people, I don't know why they come to me, but I've had many people who have, foreigners, who have always mentioned these biodigesters, and why in Malta we still do not have a biodigester for animal waste, which would see basically the processing of manure being changed into energy. Yeah? Of course, economies of scale, so the size of the farms, the individual farms. You'd need cooperation, because you can't have every farmer having a biodigester. It's an expensive technology, so you can't have it. So it needs coordination and organization. But it certainly is one way of putting it forward, because Of course, after the first person that mentioned it, I sort of said, let me see a bit, what these people are talking about. I'm not an expert, of course, in manure to energy, but it certainly has attracted attention over the last few years and attracted also questions as to how come we have, of course, the nitrates problem is one byproduct of it, but we also have an issue with animal waste, and we seem to be missing the opportunity.
Thank you. I'll collect another question and then I'll get back to you.
Hello. Hi. My name is Damian Attart. I would like to raise a discussion point, but it's more about a curiosity I have and an observation. I think when it comes to fair trade, as it was mentioned on the panel, it is not being done, or at least it is not looked as in the right moral way or with the right values. Rather than being a social movement, it's becoming more like a brand. Okay? When we're talking about fair trade, most of the, let's talk about Africa, where agriculture and most of the people in rural areas do survive on agriculture, they have to find a middleman to become fair trade recognized. This makes it very inaccessible for uneducated people to find the ways how to get their products certified fair trade. So I think that in itself, fair trade is becoming a brand, and when you see it into reality, because finally all the technologies we're mentioning or the methods that are determined by the market, I come back to a local context here in Malta. In the last few years, I have seen a lot of organic farms being established, but I have seen also the extraordinary prices you have to pay to get organic products. So once again, organic sustainability, I think, is at risk of becoming a brand. What should be normal, which is organic product sustainability, is being trademarked as something unique. And what something should not be normal is becoming normal. And I think that the reality is that when you mention fair trade, sustainable agriculture, or organic products, is becoming a product of the elite or of the people who can afford it. And this is why I believe that the whole movement is risking of becoming a brand and not seen as a social movement where it makes it accessible to everyone. Thank you.
Very, very good point. Let's just round these two questions up. I would like to add something on the biogas, if I may. I've actually done part of my PhD on a biogas system, but which you would not probably imagine at the first glance, but it's relatively little expensive, and it's a kind of a low-tech solution. So I was wondering, perhaps Tony and other members of the panel, what are the obstacles of, in your opinion, of implementing such a technology which has been existing for many years and proved to be quite successful in countries like Malta or in small islands? My hint is that could be linked to maybe a cultural or some lack of knowledge about the issue. But I'll leave this answer up to you.
I can. Well, believe it or not, back in 2012, I had the honor of making the first application for a biomass converter somewhere in Nashar, up the hill towards Salawammu. The problem is, even with MEPA, at the time it was MEPA, etc., the officers were changing every time, and the whole process took over 5 years to get synced in by the officials concerned. It was something plain and something simple. The reality outside there is, however, is very different. A person had applied for funding from the EU. In 5 years' time, he lost all the opportunities. If you're in real life, in business, you can't even afford to wait for 3 months. Prices will change every 3 months. Now over here we're going through a bureaucratic system run by a lot of bureaucrats who don't have an idea of the risk involved by the individual farmers. And that is one big problem. Even government needs to get sensitized to this issue. The other thing as well, there are other EU obligations. This farmer who applied for it was a pig producer. And we, other than the issue of cows and methane, not only in Malta but worldwide, we have an even larger local problem because of the large amount of effluent caused by local pig farms. We still don't know how to officially deal with it. But the thing is, we're failing to tackle holistically what needs to be done. This investment would have cost slightly close to $500,000 some 5 years ago. I don't know today. But then again, he has to have having biomass made out of animal manure and even adding cow's manure, etc. is not enough. You have to get other agricultural waste to give it a certain amount of waste. You have to have a certain composition, which is not that easy. And the problem comes just locally, but for any producer. When you have an animal farm, you can't just let anybody come in and dump this stuff, etc. You almost have to have a receiving station cut off from the rest of the system so that you biologically protect the rest of your system. And that is not easy here in Malta, where spaces are so limited. And where you have a neighbor next door who's ready to report you before you say good morning because of the smell, etc. There are lots of complicated social issues, even for just a silly or simple investment like that one, I think.
Thank you. Any of you would like to react to this question, or also, importantly, the other question on fair trade becoming a brand?
Just a quick comment on the biogas digesters. We have many times heard about even Maltese people going abroad, doing voluntary work, and one of their projects would be a biogas digester for third world countries. This is a very standard process that can be implemented. Now, first of all, you need to find a use for the gas generated. In a normal farm in Malta, the gas generated will have little use because we do not need heat. Normally, in the third world countries, that biogas is used for cooking, for example. But here in a farm, you wouldn't need that, and you wouldn't need to heat your place. The solution could be that there is a central biodigester where this material is taken and treated. Given that we have plans to produce energy from waste in the coming years, then that will absorb the remains of animals as well as other products that are biodegradable and can produce methane for energy production. And
a quick follow-up. Do you have any idea of the amount of energy that could be produced by using existing biomasses, in this case, from farming?
Existing waste and animal waste, so we are talking about municipal waste and animal waste, can produce around 2.5% renewable energy if converted to electricity.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Very interesting figure. Please.
Just a short reaction to the fair trade one. I totally agree with what you're saying. Fair trade indeed has become like a brand name, even for organic products. It's so expensive on the market. So what is happening is that, yes, we're moving toward green, but not inclusive. Okay, so it is not inclusive. Many people cannot afford it. And some of the people who are producing the organic products, they are not receiving the income because there are so many intermediaries, so many, transactionary process in reaching the market, in reaching the consumers. So one way of dealing with this, maybe it's to encourage consumers to buy directly from the farmers. But this also, you need a more, awareness program. You need to know where they are. So in a small country, it is easier to buy from the farmers, but in a large country, it becomes more difficult.
Martin?
No, I mean, just quite similar comments, actually. I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, especially when you mentioned the middleman, for example, even here in Malta, there is a pitkalia, for example, which is completely unregulated, and the middleman can ask for whatever price. But there's also a need for farmers to collaborate together. I mean, right now, basically, for example, at one point in time, they'll produce tomatoes and they'll all produce the same produce. Obviously, the price will go down, and obviously the middleman can abuse the system even more, because then tell them, I have so much of this that basically it's not worth anything. So sometimes they lose money, actually. So I mean, there's quite a lot to be done in that sense as well, really. But I see your point. I mean, not just in Malta, but also with other Friends of the Earth groups around the world. I mean, they all say the same thing, basically, when it comes to fair trade and organic labels, which are becoming a bit too elitist, as you said, in fact.
Thank you. Please.
You have not said anything about what animals are fed, because their feces depends on what they eat. And many told me, for example, that certain animals should not be eaten. The meat of them should not be eaten because of what they are given.
Does any...
You put that in the soil, you're going to ruin the soil.
Do you know of any existing information about the...
When you're feeding livestock, it's a combination of energy, protein, and minerals and fiber. Usually, different sized animals, according to their age, etc., will require a certain combination of these. The most common feeds usually are maize, sorghum, sometimes corn as well, depending on the energy requirement more than anything else. In Malta, we're starting to have issues because of our size. Usually, these are shipped either by trains in other countries or through large containers the size of an oil tanker. We do not require logistically a ship that size. It is too much for Malta. The two largest companies in Malta, Andrews and KPH, have joined forces to cut down cost, etc., but they have to hire a special ship, a small ship which just caters for their needs. Now, with decreasing livestock numbers, which is an issue here in Malta, the cost per ton is always on the increase for the local farmers. Another problem that we have associated with the feed is not the feces, etc., it's the summer heat. In every 10 degrees rise in temperature in a silo, the quality of the food is denatured by 50%. So unless the stored feed, grains, etc., are kept in very good conditions, what will end up feeding our animals really is not good feed, but really bulk more than anything, because most of it could have been denatured. Now, the companies are taking care of this, but there are other individuals who mix their own feeds, etc., where the conditions for storage aren't so good, etc. The other thing that we feed, other than the combination of pellets, really, which make out of these grains, is straw. We've done straw, etc. 50%, practically 50% of the total area in Malta is utilized for the production of straw, or hay, or whatever, depending on what they're going to use it. Unfortunately, we're always harvesting at the worst possible time. We should be harvesting sometime after Valentine's Day, sometime in mid-February, early March, when all the nutrients are in the stock of the wheat crop. We have an island mentality whereby we go for size rather than quality. we stay waiting till the end of May, early June, so that perhaps the crop would have grown a few more centimeters, but in so doing, all the goodies in that stock would have whittled away. All you have is fiber, no energy, and no protein. So when we're giving that feed to our animals, we're not even giving them the right support so that they have a balanced feed system, especially cows with the 4 types of stomach that they have over there. And that is leading to complications. It's not the right quality of feed for our animals. Obviously, yes, the feces will reflect the type of feed they will have, but it's not that much of an issue. What would be an issue is really how it is stored and collected rather than where it's falling. But thankfully, because of the nitrates directive, most of the manure is stored in manure clams, and there should be no issue at all whatsoever with regards to potential pollution there. The same like a normal cow. Actually, they're fed less, actually. Yeah, bull. No, like a cow. The same like a cow, practically like a cow. No, the horses would have much more protein as well. Sometimes they give them beer, they give them apples, depending on how...
They give them apples and what?
Beer as well. Depending on how much the owner wants to spoil his horse, more than anything else. But some of them spend a fortune on their horses every day.
All the ingredients that they are giving.
I can assure you that the way horses are fed, they're fed better than kings locally. I can assure you. They're fed very well.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much for thank you. I left.
It's excellent. No, it's excellent. The best manure is cow manure and even horse manure. They're good. The worst one is poultry manure because it's very high.
The worst one is
Poultry manure. It's very high in urea, and we already have a nitrates issue over there.
What can it cause, poultry manure?
Leaching of nitrates into the water table, if not incorporated immediately into the soil and broken down.
Okay, I am afraid I have to stop
No,
you here, because we have
that's
to-
not the case,
Tony,
no.
I have to, it's extremely interesting. Let's continue that when we have a glass of something or some refreshments. Is there any other curiosity or question you would like to, want to intervene? Yes, thank you. Coming along.
Okay, my name is Shola Mwamlima from Zambia. So my questions are directed to you, more of a clarification, and the other one's a question. So firstly, I like the fact that you showed a good example, good narrative of Africa with Ghana, I think his electricity capacity is over 50%. But I don't think we should overlook the fact that when you look at sub-Saharan Africa, where energy is starved, whether it's in stored capacity, overconsumption, we're really not doing well. And that's despite waterways where we could make the most of hydroelectric power and the tax incentives that have been put in place for more investment in solar. So what's the problem? Do you feel, this is just getting your opinion, do you feel that African governments should play more a regulatory role and not involved in transmission and distribution? Because I feel everything else is in place. So that's the first one. The other one is you said economic trade zones don't encourage organic products, but maybe a clarification from you. SADC recently put a premium on organic products, and they said the conversion rate will actually be shorter for Southern African countries, maybe over a year because of the virgin land. But how is this really going to help small-scale farmers who are the largest fraction of producers who use least in terms of pesticides and expensive chemicals? How are we going to ensure that they actually take up a fraction of the whole trade that's happening? Because at the end of the day, with the way goods flow in SADC region, it's the big commercial farmers that will actually invest and produce more organic products. So what do you think the way should be there? Okay. Thank you.
Do you have a question as well? Please.
Not really a question, more of an inquiry into your study. Sorry, my name is Yolande Newton. I am from Grenada, which is a southern island in the Caribbean. I know most studies would list islands or small island states. My query to you is that to what extent, when we say islands and small islands, to what extent we are talking about all islands, or are we just referring to islands in the Pacific and this side of the world? Because the topography, the geography of the islands are different. So when we are talking about enabling environments and recommendations are made, I need to understand in what context are they being made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it's good to see some good examples from Africa, because most of the time we see, Africa countries, they're not doing well. I think they do have most of the enabling conditions, but one thing that would really help, I think PPP, public-private partnership, would really help. Because the thing is that you do have the regulatory framework, you do have the motivation on the part of the public sector, but there's need for more collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. I would also recommend that there is a need in order to involve more stakeholders, like, academics. Sometimes we just leave out academics. They perform certain research and we just keep it in the drawer without applying it. So we need to consult them and see how we can improve upon what we are already doing. Regarding the issue that you mentioned about SADC, yes, I totally agree that whatever they are proposing will benefit mostly the large farmers, okay, not the small ones, because it doesn't trickle down to them. So one of the option that I think there was a panel in Mauritius, they were talking about how to make customers accessing small farmers' goods, like making their goods more marketable. Because usually they produce on a small scale, so they cannot enjoy economies of scale, they cannot reach customers, and all the benefits that is reaped is for large industries. And even if we look at fair trade, it's mostly the certification, they are for large farmers. Small farmers cannot even access that. So there's a need for capacity building of small farmers. I think that would really help. But there's also need for a support. Okay, so just capacity building would not help. You need to keep on, follow up. There's a need for follow up. They are like infant industries. So they cling to protection initially. So you need to protect them and keep on this protection for the time, for suppose 1 or 2 or 3, even 3 years when they grow up. And then they can benefit, they can become like, they can compete with large firms and benefit from whatever agreements we are signing. And also to give them some voice, because most of the time the small farmers, they don't have voice on whatever negotiation we have. But one interesting thing is that in Mauritius, whenever we have agreements on trade, basically, the public sector, I know the members of the parliament, they also invite the private sector to come and to negotiate. Okay, so there is some collaboration at least in this field. Now, regarding your comment, I would say that whatever result you had there, it was an average for small island. Okay, so it was not small island in a specific region. If you take it, suppose for island in Pacific area or in Indian Ocean, so the specificity will count. But on average, it was the result on average for small islands, on average. But if we carry out the result, maybe the enabling conditions that I have mentioned will differ depending on what is the context in that particular island. Like whatever will be the enabling conditions for Malta will not be the same for Mauritius. Okay, so that whatever was presented was on average. Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to come to a conclusion unless there are any other burning observations or questions. Great. So I'd like to thank the panel once again and all of you who have contributed. And this video is being recorded. Sorry, this seminar is being recorded. We'll be making the video available on the YouTube channel of the University of Malta. Of course, we'll be also publicizing this this outcome through the video, so you can absolutely access and disseminate. We'd like to ask you to access our Facebook and Twitter accounts. We are active and we post regularly on climate change related issues, both in relation to Malta as well as abroad and on small island states, so quite a big array of posts ranging on different subjects. So if you're interested or would like to keep in touch, do follow us on the social media and on our websites. Thank you to also Romina and Rachel from our institute who have helped us very much in the organization of this event, and once again to our guests who have come here. So thank you very much. Now let's enjoy some refreshments, and thank you.